Right, I'm going to do two things really. As the heading says, mostly what I want to talk about is the fact that there needs to be, and there is, and COBIC are part of it, a series of mechanics, a series of tools, a series of things that you can grab hold of to make things happen. There needs to be more than that, but there needs to be a series of things. And without those mechanics, people have very good intentions, but in the end the intentions run into the wall of conservatism, because actually people say, well, actually, what's the contract, where's the money, and all these sorts of things. So I'm going to go through those mechanics and the 5 elements of those mechanics. But before then, there's a bit about the relationship between, as Bob was saying, the nature of the crisis and why integrated care and integrated care for outcomes is a part of the solution to what is essentially a value crisis. And also, more to the point, you have everybody in the National Health Service talking about doing integrated care at the moment, but a lot of it keeps on not happening. That's the main thing that's happening in integrated care. It isn't happening. And one of the reasons it isn't happening is there's inadequate power behind the oomph of integration. And one reason there's inadequate power behind it is commissioners have not been commissioning integrated care. It's been got together by groups of people meeting around a table and saying, I know, let's be integrated, rather than actually commissioning and driving it. So the purpose of the talk today is to put the oomph for integrated care with commissioning behind that, and to demonstrate that I think with these mechanics we can do integrated care. Without them, I'm not sure providers getting together and saying it's integrated care is actually integrated care. And why is that? And the reason why integrated care is so hard is that the NHS is passionate about fragmentation. Really passionate. And you think about what that means. You think about the people that are district nurses. I was in the west of London a little while ago, and they just formed a group of tissue nurses. Fantastic, right? Where actually these nurses only built up skin and built up tissue. Really good, but they weren't integrated with the other district nurses. So the more specialisms we get, the diabetes nurse, all of these is really great, but the more specialisms we get, the more fragmented the health service is, and the more de-integrated it is. So the whole direction of medicine is anti-integration. And actually medicine's quite good, it's really quite useful for a health service. So you actually can't say specialism's a bad thing, but the failure to bring these things together creates the problem that we're facing in a de-integrated and fragmented care. So the reason you find integration hard is people are passionately in favour of fragmentation. Just remember that, right? And it's not that people are stupid to be passionate in favour of fragmentation. It has saved lives. Up the road in Moorfields, there are 14 experts on the back of the eye, different sorts of expertise. That's a really good thing, it's just that it's hellish to integrate. So in doing integration, it's hard for good reasons. And that we are not, if I say this in Coin Street, a bunch of hippies that believe everybody can do everything. They can't, it's dangerous if we think that, right? So we're in favour of specialisation, but we're in favour of that specialisation being organised, and that's difficult. If you include, as we all have to include, social care, there's passionate fragmentation in social care as well. People who do domiciliary care hate people who do residential care, because they've sort of sold out. So you actually have this passion, and let alone you bring in the voluntary sector, there's real passion there against each other. Right? And so if someone says bring this lot together and make integrated care out of it, it's hard. And I think the purpose for me today is that commissioning provides the power to actually bring a powerful source of instruction to providers to get that. It doesn't make it easy, but it's a new form of power. And why is this important? I think if we look at what's going on in the NHS, we can see in the bits increasing amounts of value. I always use a friend of mine who has had 2 hips and 2 knees done over the last 11 years. The first hip, he was in hospital for 11 days. The last knee last year, he was overnight. He's 10 years older, he's in his 70s now, but overnight. Now the value created by that operation when it's 1 day is much greater than the value created by 11 days. So we've actually improving the value of the bits very considerably in all sorts of ways. But if the physio doesn't turn up the next day and the leg locks, the value becomes a minus. So improving the value of the bits, we are not necessarily or at all improving the value chain without there being a value chain. And the answer to Bob's crisis, financial and demand crisis, is creating value chains where the value is held in the value chain, and therefore you actually have more value being produced rather than the bits of value. So the production of fragmented care wastes value. You can see it seeping away at the edges because of the fragmentation. And the purpose of integrated care isn't that it's just much better as a patient experience, it also holds and creates more value. So the reason why this is so important is it is a genuinely economic answer to a genuine economic problem for the health service, and the more we create value in fragmented bits, the more unlikely it is that we're going to see our way through this value. So integrated care creates the possibility of a value chain. It doesn't necessarily mean then that the value improves, because you then have to walk up and down the value chain and make it better. But that's the reason why this is important, and that's the reason why incentivised contracts push value along that chain rather than more and more fragmented bits of value. So that, in a sense, is the reason why this is so important. And these are the 5 sets of mechanics. And I start off really with something that goes beyond the mechanic, right? Because as Bob was just saying, we have 211 sets of commissioners. I'm sad because I and a group of students have read all of their commissioning intentions, 211 sets of commissioning intentions. Right? This is a sad task to do, right? But someone had to do it, right? And the really interesting thing is about 170 of those clearly say we're going to commission integrated care. There is an intention of nearly every CCG to commission integrated care. And then very soon, when they start to face that problem, they look at the contracts they've got to implement and they think, I want to construct integrated care for outcomes, and the contract I've got is for fragmented care for inputs. Oh, well, I better do that. So in a sense, people are bouncing off, looking at the mechanics and bouncing off an intention, and then they may call it integrated care, but it's actually fragmented input care. And there's a lot of that going on. And to change that, to challenge that, the idea of persistent and brave commissioners is that there is a persistence that's necessary. Right? So the commissioners need to come back to you and say, I notice you said we're going to integrated care, and that's the intention, the commissioning intention, and I now notice that we're not doing that. Right? Why are we not doing it? We're not doing it because that's the nature of the contract. Well, I'm afraid we're not going to use that contract, we're going to do something different. The persistence here is actually essential, because you're having to overcome very real problems of doing innovation, constructing this innovation. And one of the things about disruptive innovation, this is a big shock, is it disrupts. Right? And if it disrupts, it's quite difficult to do. And so the persistence and the bravery, and the point of all the mechanics after is you can assist people to be persistent and brave by providing straightforward mechanics to do that. So that not everybody in every CCG has to construct a brand new contractual form or a brand new form of pricing, and that seems to be the point of there being a club. So a lot of, as you'll hear from the stories later on of Bedfordshire and Oxfordshire, the persistence and bravery is actually when providers say, we're not going to play, what do you do? It's quite hard then. And you have to say, well, that's tough, we're going to go ahead in any case. And then, funnily enough, they play. But this is not an easy set of activities. Second thing which you're going to hear a lot more about is, if you've got position, we do need a new form of contract. We need something which is going to look at a set of outcomes, going to look at a set of incentives. And we had I was talking with Steve Richards earlier on this morning, there was a meeting in Oxfordshire of tens of old people's groups about what is an outcome. And it's really quite an interesting, and I thought, what on earth is, I was meant to be speaking, what on earth do you do, right? All these, and actually some people are very, very small groups, some are Age UK, and it only took about an hour and a quarter, that probably an outcome would be, and this is really interesting, they said you spend a lot of money on us. Wouldn't it be interesting is whenever we have an interaction with the health service, at the end of that interaction, we were more independent than we were at the beginning. That's an outcome. That's terrifying, because it's not what we do. what providers do is generally create more dependency with every interaction. Now, wouldn't it be interesting? What a good thing for a health service, eh? We spend all this money on people, why not make them more independent? Now, that would change almost every aspect. If you put that in a contract, and you said to a hospital, when Mrs. Jones comes in and is a little bit demented, we want her to leave less demented than she went in the hospital, the hospital would change or get no money. So it's possible to construct the nature of these outcomes, but it creates very, very different sorts of images. And the interesting thing is the old people in the audience believe we were already doing this. When you said, so you pay people for doing hip replacements that don't work. You don't really do it. Yeah, we do it all the time. The idea of there being, we can construct contracts which have incentives in, and you'll hear a lot about that later on. The other point, as Bob said, people say, well, that's very interesting, but you can't do that with PBR. No, you can't do that with PBR. But PBR is there to be changed. And around the country, you've got increasing number of localities that are looking at how you construct a different sort of pricing mechanism. And Monitor and NHS England produced a consultation document 2 weeks ago about the future of pricing that said, let's move in this direction. So if somebody says, no, you're not allowed to do that because it's not PBR, it's not true. This is the direction that the health service needs to move in, with much more flexible bits of pricing around the nature of incentivization and integration. And this was just very interesting. About 15 months ago, John Oldham said we want places to volunteer to do a year of care. 95 health economists applied, because nearly all of them saw this as really, really important. So, and you can do this, what's happening around the country is you can work out the pricing if you have a procurement form which has as much competitive dialogue as you can. And you work it out before the very end of the process, rather than pretend you know the money at the beginning. Because actually it's a pretense to know the money at the beginning, and you work that out. So again, there's a mechanic of a competitive dialogue, which is really crucial. This is the full thing, which I think I'd just like very strongly say, this may not be necessary in most people's belief, but I think it's necessary for the future of the health service. We are not just bringing together existing services and calling it integration. That's an interesting thing to do, but it won't save the health service. We actually have to find new forms of value, not just bring together the old forms of value. And the new forms of value we need to find, since most integrated care is about elements of long-term conditions, the crucial thing about long-term conditions is in the name. You have them for a long time. And if you have them for a long time, you gain sets of knowledge and sets of expertise in them. And we, as a health service, do not trade or invest in that expertise. This is where the new value will come from. So when you look at your chain and you construct your integrated care, if you've not got a massive increase in the investment of the capacity of people to self-manage, you probably are not constructing a value chain that will survive. Because actually we need to, that's what we need, the investment. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but it does cost. And value improvement doesn't happen if you've not got self-management being invested. One of these odd facts is that if you're awake for 5,800 hours a year, you are managing your own long-term condition. The health service doesn't introduce you to self-management, it's there. You self-manage, you just don't do it very well. And what we need to do is invest in that so people do it better and change that. So this, for me, is an important addition to the way in which the contract is constructed. And last, and this is easily the most difficult, is the end result of all of this is a completely different organisational form of providers. If you look at the way in which boards of existing trusts get their money at the moment, they get their money primarily through sets of contracts that are redundant for our purposes in this room. And they are redundant for the future. And yet that is how they are used to getting their money. They're used to getting their money around, they are incentivised to do episodic care. And we are trying to change that. And this is a very radical change. And the biggest problem, it seems to me, in getting these things going in every area is getting the attention of your providers. Are you really going to do this? No, actually the question is, you're not really going to do this, are you? Right? And yes, you are. No, okay, you're not really. And actually getting the attention of the providers as early as you can is a major part of the mobilisation of this. And if it's left to the end of the contracting process, you have 6 months of hell then, where you actually need to get people's providers. At the very beginning, all the providers that provide any of the services need to pay attention and need to start to take this seriously. And that's very difficult because they are going to organise themselves very differently. A major provider of services, Guys and Tommies up the road, and this enormous provider may end up being a subcontractor. It cannot conceive of being a subcontractor because we are the most important place in the world. And now you're subcontracting for somebody else. They cannot conceive of that, but that will happen in the next 5 years. They'll primarily be a subcontractor to somebody else's contract. This is very hard for providers to understand. And getting their attention to do that has to be a part of the initial process, not leaving it to the end of the process. And that means that you've got at the end of this no single public or private provider contracting for an integrated pathway. No one has the competency to do this. That's quite nerve-wracking when you start this process, right? Because you start this process without competent people being able to do it. You look around the horizon of your local health economy and you do not see competency in integrated care. What you see is competency, if you're lucky, you see competency in fragmented care. But you don't see competency in integrated care. But you see people saying, yeah, we can do that, and they may not be able to. And so in the bidding process, they have to start working together. This is very hard for organisations that have actually seen themselves as opposed to each other. But the earlier, just the main point I'm making here is the earlier you get people thinking, recognising this is different and coming together, the easier it is on the outside. So the organisation of these services, the outcome will be a radically different organisational form, where most of the provision may be provided by exactly the same people that provide it at the moment. But the organisational form that takes place in maybe very good. No one's going to do an MSK set of services in South East London without Guys and Tommies doing a large number of these and these. But it will be totally organised in a different way. And that is quite a, as I say, getting your attention to do that. And that's just a series of the URLs, some stuff around COBICs, other forms of contracting. I think I draw your attention, and then I'll shut up, to the Richmond group of patients, because actually they are passionate about this. They want there to be an outcomes set of orientation contracts, and that's what and so if you go to your local groups of Diabetes UK, all of those, they will actually understand this very quickly and say, how can we get behind it? So you can get patient groups for most of these conditions. Age UK are very passionate about these sorts of issues. And there's a paper that Steve Lake and I wrote on the Council League Provider, and this is just the URL for Bedfordshire and how they got there. Thanks a lot.